Okay, so we've seen the basics about exception handling, which is if you have an exception, you can, if you expect that the exception might happen, you can put a try catch to be able to catch that exception. If something wrong happens, then it is going to be caught. Now, I just would like to show you some different things that are also part of the exception handling, because there's some kind of variations that we can also use in the exceptions, like the try catch. I can have mini catch. I can have a catch and another catch, one try and many catches. The thing that we have seen, we just have one try, one catch, and then that's one new thing I'm going to be talking about. The second thing is that we can have some other part that is part of the try catch, which is optional, which is the finally. The finally is some kind of a place or a block of code where I put some code that is going to be executed all the time, and I'm going to explain maybe some kind of examples where this makes more sense. Let's say, for example, for now, I just would like to read something from the user. I need to use the scanner. So the scanner, let's call it key b equal new scanner system.in, which means I'm going to read things from the keyboard and just ask the user, please enter an integer or a positive integer. And then I'll put an int n equal kb.nextInt. Now I can just display you entered and then n, like a very simple program that seems to do nothing, basically just to display whatever was entered. Now the thing is that I ask for a positive number, but I'm not checking, because I could just put anything and it will be accepted as long as it's a number. But there's a problem that if I type something else that is not a number, then I have this kind of exception, input mismatch exception, because what was expected was not what was given. So that's this kind of input mismatch exception. That's what this exception means. Now if I'd like to catch that exception and to not have this kind of things, I need to surround this with a try catch. Now this puts this code into a try catch, which means that I try to execute this. If there's a problem, it is going to try to do something. Let's say I can say the number, wrong number, let's say. Now wrong number, that's what I'm going to display for now. But then if I run this thing, notice one thing first of all, because I have the declaration, when I use this try catch and I use this surround with, the declaration of n was taken out, so it can be used in the try and also outside of the try. So that's why, actually, let me just show you what happened, because I did not focus on showing this. You see, when I surrounded this, what happened is that I did not put the declaration, NetBeans did not put the declaration of n inside here. Why? Because if I put it inside, it will be known only inside that block, and then I cannot use it here. Because NetBeans detected that this n is also used outside, so it just took the declaration, put it out, and then added the rest, and put this initialization to be as 0, yes. Okay, now I'm running this thing, which means now if I type something, there's a number, I'm going to say, okay, you entered this. But if I run it and then I type something which is not a number, then it will say, wrong number, you entered 0. Well, not really, I did not enter 0. Maybe it's better if I put this thing inside, because this is going to be shown only if there was no problem executing this line. Now this is going to be like this. That's fine, but if there's a problem, then it says wrong number. All right. Now the thing is that I can have mini catch. Now if for some reasons, not in this example, but the type of exception that can be caught from here is the input mismatch. You saw that when there was an exception, it was input mismatch exception. Now I can, if there's some kind of code that can generate many different kind of exceptions, and let me show you. For example, one of the things is that I can have this n divided by 0. This might generate an exception if I divide by 0. Now look at this. They have this problem because e was already used here. I cannot use the same e. That's my problem here. So I can say exception, and then the other thing is that the exception has already been caught, because it might be caught here, yeah. Because this is about the sequence basically, and what can be thrown in here is something different, I think. So the sequence was different because if I put something like this, okay, it means if there was an exception, it will be caught, any kind of exception. But now if it's a special exception, I'm going to do something special, then this is something that is going to be done. So when I'm doing this kind of sequence, that means if there's a problem that is an exception, it's going to go here, and it will never reach this step. So that's why actually it will make more sense to have something like this when you have, and I think the e is not a problem. Yeah, that I said that it was a problem because it was e, but the e is going to be only known inside the block it's declared on. So this is not going to be an issue. So now I can say, for example, something wrong happened. So this is more general, but this here, wrong input. So now we have two types of exceptions that can happen. If this exception happened, that means the wrong input was given to me, I'm going to get inside, it's going to be caught here, and this is what is going to be executed. But if the number was okay, and then I'm doing some kind of wrong thing here, then the other one is going to be, yeah, exactly. So for example, what I'm going to do, let's say, if the number, this n, is negative, I'm going to divide by 0. How about that? Now this is going to do something that I'm not going to always execute this line. I'm going to execute it only if the number given was negative. That means the number is okay. So if I put -5, that means this line is going to be not generating any exception. I'm not expecting exception to happen, and then it's going to go to this line, and then it's going to do something wrong happened. No, not because of this mismatch exception, but because of the general one that was caught. So, yes. No. Well, this, especially this one, you can't. What about this one? What about this one? You can know, because this is going to raise an exception. This line of code is not going to be executed because it will try to put a number inside this n, but it can't because I gave it this kind of. How can you make this an int? You don't get my question. The if is going to be what? If what? If n is equal to, is having something, right? It's greater than 0, right? Okay. And then you put something. I don't care. This line is never going to be executed. Why? Because this is going to raise an exception if I put this kind of input. That's what I'm trying to tell you. If I put this thing as an input, this line is not going to be going well. It's going to stop the program. Because how can you convert this kh whatever into a number? So you can't pass this line to go and reach here and do an if and else. So that's why that's not possible, because if I just remove this thing, remove this try catch, if I run now, if I type this whatever, it's not going to go through your if, because this line is creating a problem. You understand? So now that's why this is required to be a try catch when you have to get some kind of exceptions to handle them. Now the new thing that I'm showing you is that you can have some kind of a chain of exceptions. Actually, basically this, if I don't have this exception, this catch exception, and I run this thing and I put a negative number, what is going to happen is this is my exception. You see, division by 0, this is arithmetic exception. So this is another exception, which means now instead of being too general, I can just be specific. I can catch another exception, the arithmetic exception. If there's an arithmetic exception, I'm going to say, because I'm going to have a division by 0, I'm going to say division by 0, for example. Yes. There are many actually. In the exceptions, you can have a lot of different kind of exceptions, but you can, of course, you can design your own as well. So every class that you use, if they're throwing some kind of exception, in the description it will tell you that this method, for example, like this next int, might throw some kind of exception. And basically this is something I'm going to also show to you, because I'm not seeing this here. Yeah, but you see this throws this, it throws some kind of exception. As you can see, this one here is throwing an exception if there's a problem. But I'm not seeing something that I was expecting, which is throws, but okay. Maybe because it's somewhere else. Hold on. I'm just trying to see if there's a lot of comments. No. Okay, anyway, I'll go into whatever I wanted to explain. So you can have many type of exceptions, because you can customize your own exceptions. You create your classes that are extending exceptions, and then you become to have your own type of exceptions. Yes. You can have another catch. No, because every statement is not going to be in one line. You're not going to be having 5 exceptions. So one of them is going to be thrown. So if one of them is thrown, then it's going to be caught by one of the catches. So you cannot have, like, even if, for example, this method can throw different type of exceptions, but I'm not throwing them all at once. So one is going to be thrown. So if then I'm going to catch them one at a time. If you remember, what we did last time, we did something about this day, month. You remember when we had this kind of day exception, month exception, and I think it was not here. So it was, I think, exercise date converter. I think that's what we call it, maybe. So in this one, yes, this is where we had this day exception, month exception, and year exception. You see, in this example, what we tried to do is that we were reading a value, and then if there's something we throw, and then we can catch. Basically, we catch what we did here. We just catch exception. Now, what kind of exception can be thrown? 3 types actually. It can be day, it can be month, it can be year. What I can say is that I can do something different than what I did before. I can do something more specific, which basically I can say if it's a day exception, then I'm going to display, well, there was a problem. There is a problem with the day. And then now you see, because I have only one here, now these 2 becomes a problem, because it tells me these are unreported exceptions. I did not catch them. I'm throwing some exceptions that I'm not catching, because I'm only catching a day exception. But if I'd like to catch them as well, I'm just going to add them here, and now I'm going to catch the month exception, which basically, if you remember, this month exception is just a class that just says something wrong month or something like that in the message that it was given to it. So now the month is not a problem, only the year. I just need to do the same. There's a problem. I need to make this a month and this year. And year exception. Now you see, as soon as I do this, there's no problem anymore. Now everything is going to be cut. Now to answer your question, I have many exceptions that can be raised, but are they going to be raised at the same time? No, one at a time. So if I enter something wrong for the day, if the day is wrong, I'm going to throw new day exception. Then I'm going to catch that new day exception and do something with it. Now let's try to use this as an example for the finally. Finally is a kind of code that is going to be executed all the time, regardless if there was an exception or there wasn't an exception. There are some cases when this finally might make sense. In this case, not much, but I'm going to show you one case that makes sense. Now, the finally is a code that is going to be executed all the time, regardless of thanks, whatever, or thank you, or program over, or end, something like that, whatever. Program is finishing, something like that, whatever. So if there's an exception, it's going to be caught, go into one of the catch, execute what is inside, and then go to the finally, and then get out, finish. If there was no exception, everything went fine, I finished the try, I'm going to go into the finally, and then I get out. So finally, we go inside of it all the time, regardless if there was an exception or not. And a good example of why this makes sense is, for example, for this scanner. We never did this, but actually, when you do this scanner, when you open the scanner, when you initialize that, actually you open something that you can close. That's why here, you open the resource, you open the like a listener to the keyboard, and then once you're done with it, you can close it. We never do this because at the end we stop the program and the program closes everything, so everything is done. But what if I'd like to do something and then later on open it again and close it, and so I can do this kind of closing resources that are used generally. You have to initialize again, yeah, like this. You have just to put this kind of code, this line. Yeah. But the idea is that this try is going to be executed. If there was no exceptions, it will go to the finally and then stop. If there was an exception, it will go into the catch, and then it will go to the finally. So finally is going to be executed all the time. And that's an example of this try, many catches, and then the final. Yes. Mm-hmm. If you have many catches. Yes, you have many type of exceptions can happen in your code inside the try.
Yeah, like the previous one, the month.
Yes.
If I have the month, the month, the year.
Yes.
The exception will be about the three of them, or just one, this one.
Now, for example, if there's an exception about the day.
You will stop on the day?
Exactly. I'm not going to be continuing and raise another exception about the month, because as soon as I reach here, there's a problem with the day, it will throw an exception, I'm going to exit the try and go to one of the catches. So that's why, even if there are many exceptions that are thrown, only one is going to be caught at a specific time. So that was his question actually. So now just I would like to show you one other thing, one last thing about those exceptions, is that when you have some kind of classes that are, or a method that's going to get some, generate some exceptions. And how to do that? Well, let's create a class. I'm going to just create a new class. I'll create this new class, and in that new class I'm just going to, well, let's have I'm just having a variable, and then I'm going to be having a method, public void method. Wow. That method just whatever it does something, and basically okay, let me do something. I'm going to do if a is positive, then I'm going to increment a, else I just would like to throw a new exception. And this new exception, I'm going to say, well, the number is not positive. Now, you remember what we used to have when we have a throw, what we used to do, we need to put a try catch inside. But we don't want to put a try catch here. We just would like to say that this method is going to may generate an exception, and the ones who are going to be using this method need to catch the exception when they call this method. Now notice, now this is showing me there's a mistake. If I click here, there's two options. Either you put some kind of throws in the exception, or you surround with a try catch. But I don't want to put a try catch because I don't want to catch this exception. I just would like to have the user who is using my method to be able to catch this exception. Then what I should do, I'm just going to say that this method, it throws an exception. And this is another thing that I can put in methods. So after these things, this is the method signature. I can mention if a method throws some kind of exception or not. So it can be any data type. Why is it called exception? Because I'm throwing a new exception. If I'd like to have this arithmetic exception, for example, then I'm going to throw an arithmetic exception. Because just to explain to the user of your method what you're throwing, what kind of exception is going to be happening. So if you have your customized exceptions, then you can put your custom exception. I can, for example, I'll take a question later. Create a new class that I'm going to call my exception. And this is going to be just extending the exception, and nothing special there. I'll just leave it like that. And then I'm going to throw my exception. Now, if I have my exceptions be called, I cannot do this because I don't have a constructor that takes one argument. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to insert a constructor that will take one argument, and whatever the argument is, I try to. So the message, whatever the message is going to be, is going to be sent to the superclass as to be the message. So the super constructor, the exception is going to be using this text that I'm sending to initialize the class exception. Because I'm sending here some information, I just would like that information to be saved. Now, if I'm using something like this, I would like to use this new class now. I'm going to, let's say, in this new class, I'm going to create a new object, new class, and then by default, because there's a default constructor, I did not have anything, the a is going to be 0, right? So if a is 0, is this going to be true or false? This is going to be false the first time. If I call the method, this is going to be false because 0, is it greater than 0? No. I'm going to throw an exception. So if I just use the method without changing the a. Now let's have a look at why am I saying this, because now I'm going to put this obj dot and then call the method. Notice one thing now, because I'm calling this method can throw an exception, because I mentioned that this method, it can throw an exception, and the type of that exception is my exception. So I cannot just use it like this. I need to put it inside of a try catch, or maybe just take this and put it inside. Now if I put it inside, I'm not catching that kind of exception, because here I'm catching input mismatch and arithmetic, but I'm not catching the my exception. So I need to catch that, so I can add this catch clause that is going to catch my exception. Now if the exception was caught, I just would like to explain that this is the message that was caught. Get message. Remember this get message from the exception. So it will let me just use Control Z and then Control R. Just name it E for consistency, because I just named everything E. Now this, if there was a problem here, and there will be a problem, I'm going just to see the message. What would be the message? If I look here, the message is going to be the number is not positive. Now if I run this thing, please enter a positive number. That's what I'm seeing. This is the result of this, and just print. That's why it's still on one line. Okay. And then I have the number is not positive. This was because this method raised an exception that made it go here. Now if I just do something that will make it sure that it's not going to be an exception, for example put some numbers in there, now this is going to be not raising any exception, so the exception was not given, and then now I'm here, I'm in this line. And if I type something, now I type something else, so it's going to be no problem. There was no exception raised, and then no catch was required. I just went to the finally, and I can just show you that I went inside the finally all the time by just saying thanks, and then end of the program. So what we're going to see is all the time I'm going to see these thanks and end of the program, because regardless of a try or a catch, it will always go to the finally. And this is what I'd like to show you, that if there is no problem, it's going to say thanks and then go into the end of program. And if there was a problem, by putting something like this, it will say wrong input because it went into one of the catch, and then thanks again, and then end of the program. So the finally is always. So why put the finally? Because if I don't put the finally, it will just execute this all the time anyways. So why put the finally? Finally is some kind of I don't know if you get my point. I'm going to take your questions. Just give me a minute. If I remove this thing, isn't it going to be the same? Because if there's a problem, I'm going to go into one of the catch and then execute this and then have the program. If there was no problem, I'm going to execute just whatever is in the try and then do this. So one then have the finally. Do you see the point? It seems like it's useless because I can just remove it. It will be working the same time, the same way. Now the finally is just for organizational purposes, to say that this code is related to this block of try catch. I'm trying to do something, and then and generally it works well when you, for example, later on you're going to be working with the networking. You open a connection, you try to open a connection because maybe you can't open. You try to open a connection, maybe there's no internet, maybe there's the server you'd like to reach is not reachable. There's a lot of problems that can happen in network connection. You try to open, if there's a problem you catch it, but if there's no problem, finally if you finish, you close the connection. So it just shows that you do something and then you close whatever needs to be closed as some kind of resources that you just used. That's why this finally is more about organization than about something that is really needed to do some kind of work. Because you can just remove it, it will do exactly the same thing. But when you put it inside of the finally, you're just saying that this code is related to what is happening in the try catch. And that's what this finally is. Okay, your questions. Rashid, you had something before. Yes, that's a good point. Yes, we can have, for example, in the my method here, I can throw some different type of exceptions, like throw new exception. Now I'm throwing two types of exception, two type of exceptions test, whatever. So this is not going to be thrown because I'm saying that this method only throws my exception. What if I'd like to throw more? Well, you just put a comma and then you put the other one. So add throws for this, so you just put a comma. That means this method throws this kind of exception and this kind of exception as well. And if you have more, you can have more. Yes. Yes.
At first, for the finally, I think if you don't put finally, it will appear anyway.
Yes, if I don't put finally, it's just going to work the same way.
It will be appear with the catch.
No, because you see, this is outside of the catch, right?
Yeah.
So if there's a problem in the try, one of the catches is going to be catching the problem, and then I'm going to execute whatever after the catch.
So it will appear anyway.
Exactly. So it's finally is not something that is going to do some extra thing. It just works the same way as if it doesn't, if it's not there. The only way where it's there, as of my understanding, is just for organizational purposes, just to show that these things go together.
The last catch, you make your own catch
Yes.
with the new class.
Yes.
That's the difference between the last one and the one before.
This one, yeah, this is my customized exception that I just created. This exception here that I just created, but yeah.
And the other from Java.
The others are, yes, available. Yeah, exactly, they're available. Now notice, because this method now throws more than one exception, I'm still not catching the exception. So I need to add another clause to catch the exception. So if there was an exception, then I'm going to say that's something happened, for example. So now I can have as many as needed to catch them. But what if I don't want to do that? I can do also just this.
So happens.
Whatever happens, I don't care. Regardless if it was that kind of exception, an arithmetic, or an input mismatch, or my kind of exception, just say something else. So I lose the opportunity to go into details. I'll just be general. There was a problem. But then if I would like to be more specific, I can. I just need to do a single catch for each one of the type of exceptions so I can do something specific. But it's up to me to know how I'm going to deal with those exceptions. I can just put them all in this here. And why this is going to work with all? Because every class exception is inheriting from exception. So which means by catching exception, I can catch all kinds of exceptions. If you just write this, you catch anything. But you don't know exactly which one is which. But if you don't care, fine, I don't care. I just would like to catch. If there was a problem, we just would like to display some message. I don't care if it was an input mismatch or an arithmetic, whatever. So I'm just going to say there was a problem. That's it. Now that's the power of this exception, because everything is inheriting from exception. This becomes like some kind of upcasting. Whatever happens, I'm going to put it into exception, and then I'm going to catch it. There was a question? Yes.
In the try, if there is an exception, it will go to one of the catches, right?
Yes.
How do you know which one of the catches will be?
Because when an exception is thrown, you know which exception is going to be thrown. For example, when I throw this, I know that it's going to be my exception. So it will know that, okay, this was one my exception was thrown, so I'm going to catch my exception. When I'm throwing a type of exception, I know which type of exception I'm throwing, and then the catch can know based on what kind of data type that you put here. That's how it knows. So generally, for example, when you use a method, now I just would like to use this method. You see, it just shows you that what kind of exceptions can throw. So this method, this is my method, it can throw a my exception, it can throw also exceptions. So you know exactly when you use this, if you'd like to catch some specific things, what is going to happen. And this is something basically that's that highlights the importance of the documentation. When you write a code, you need to explain to the user of your code, of your method, of your classes, what are they doing. So for example, what I can say and put some kind of documentation, and this is another topic, but that's a good point, that's a good time to talk about it. And this is some Java doc. If you see, if I with NetBeans, it can help me basically by doing something like this. You just do something like 1/ and 2 stars and press enter. It will just continue complete with the rest. You remember there's a block comment which is just 1 star and then you close it, a /**. This is becoming a block comment. But when you do something like this, like 2 slash, this is something special. There's going to be like some kind of Java documentation that is going to be shown to you, like here if I need it, and I'm going to show it to you now. Let me show it to you. Now NetBeans helps you by explaining, okay, this method does this and does that, does this and that. So you give some kind of explanation that explains that what this method is doing, and then it can throw some exception. So when there's when the number is negative, so it's going to throw this kind of exception, and then always throws this exception. So for example, I'm not typing really. So now this becomes some kind of a documentation that I can see where here. So you see, this method does this and that, and then I can see more information about it. See, the same way I used to see the others, and you can see that this method does this, and then it throws this when the number is the negative, and it always throws this exception, something like that. So you can see actually, when you use a method, what would happen, what kind of exception can be thrown, and when, something like that. But the main idea, just to summarize, when you have some kind of exceptions, you put them inside of a try catch, and you can have many catch blocks based on the different type of exception that you would like to catch, or just one, but then you have to use the exception superclass, the exception, which will catch any kind of exceptions. You can use the finally if you want to, if you have something to do all the time, regardless of there's an exception or not. And then the last thing that we've seen is that if you have a method that throws some kind of exception or exceptions, you can just not catch them inside and just decide that the one who is going to be using your method needs to catch the exceptions and deal with them. I'm not dealing with the exceptions. I'm just saying that if there's a situation like this, I'm going to throw this kind of exception or that kind of exception, and then the user of my method needs to deal with it. So that's why this method here, I'm putting it inside of a try catch, and I'm dealing with the fact that it can raise different kind of exceptions, can throw different kind of exceptions like this and this one. Yes. Yes. This is a class. The exception is a class. This is the data type. The exception is the data type.
How is that?
This is the exception.
Oh.
The class is called exception.
My
Would-
exception is a class.
My exception is another class. Yes, my exception here. This my exception is another class
It's in Java.
that extends. No, I just added it. That extends the exception. You can create your own classes that extends your exceptions. Will make them your own exceptions.